Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, which is apparently starting today with the album cover for Loreena McKennitt's The Mask and Mirror. An album I enjoyed quite a bit, but that's not really pertinent. What's pertinent is a particular song on that album, which is entitled The Bonnie Swans. A farmer there lived in the north country, hey-ho and me bonny-o. He had daughters, 1, 2, 3, the swans swim so bonny-o. Those daughters they walked by the river's brim, hey-ho and me bonny-o. The eldest pushed the youngest in, the swans swim so bonny-o. O sister, pray lend me your hand, and I will give you house and land. I'll give you neither hand nor glove, until you give me your own true love. Sometimes she sank, sometimes she swam, until she came to a miller's dam. The swan swims so bonny-o. The miller's daughter dressed in red, she went for some water to make her bread. O father, O daddy, here swims a swan, it's very like a gentlewoman. They laid her on the bank to dry, there came a harper passing by. And here's where it gets gruesome. At this point, it becomes actually really quite horrifying. Because the harper, who has found this dead noblewoman lying on the ground, he made harp pins of her fingers fair. He made harp strings of her golden hair. He made a harp of her breastbone, and straight it began to play alone. He brought it to her father's hall, and there was the court assembled all. He laid the harp upon the stone, and straight it began to play alone. And the harp speaks. There does sit my father the king, which, for the record, the fact that this starts off saying a farmer there lived in the north country, that probably relates to something to do with the fact that there was a time in history when any tin pot dictator could declare himself king just because he, had money and people had to do what he said because he'd hired mercenaries. So, I mean, there's that. But, let's leave historical oddity behind for a moment. Get back to the plot line. There does sit my father the king, yonder sits my mother the queen, and there does sit my brother Hugh, and by him William, sweet and true. And there does sit my false sister Anne, who drowned me for the sake of a man. And there the song ends. So, what does this have to do with anything? Well, there is a book by Patricia Wrede. It's a book of short stories. And in that book, there's a short story. The second last story in the Book of Enchantments. And that story is called Cruel Sisters, and it was inspired by a version of this song. You see, the Trois Sisters, this story is an old folk tale, an old fairy tale about two sisters. The eldest pushes the youngest in because she wants the man who's in love with the youngest. And at the end of this book, Patricia Wrede talks about where she gets ideas from and talks about a few inspirations for stories in this book, and talks about how she heard a variant of that story that starts off with, he had daughters 1, 2, 3. But this whole story is about the eldest and the youngest, and not about this middle daughter who just vanishes after that one mention. And she writes this story, and the reason I harp on it so much is not just because Loreena McKennitt gives me an in to talk about something besides just the plot of the story, but because this particular story it's always stood out to me. It stood out to me for, it is a twisted fairy tale, an unexpected ending, because, of course, in the course of this story, William turns out to be sweet, but sweet in a I will get with any woman who will let me land a princess because, marrying a princess is really, really great for your social status and making you rich. And the narrator of this story is the middle sister, the mostly ignored middle sister, the middle sister who loses the youngest, and after her youngest sister the younger sister has been dead for a year, this harper arrives and plonks down a harp that was made from the body of her dead sister, and she saw things that nobody else did. She saw the feud between her sisters that went right back to the beginning, that went right back to their childhoods, and it always stuck out at me at the end when she remembers Anne, who had at one point been accused of pouring ink all over the youngest Eleanor's dress, and Eleanor had basically set her up, had basically lied and said, yes, Anne threw ink all over my dress, and Anne got punished. She got a whipping for it, and had responded to this by ruining her sister's dress deliberately, with malice aforethought, saying, it was not true when she said it, but I will make it true now. And at the end of this, Meg, our narrator, she speaks and says that she remembers that Anne smashed the harp to bits, saying, then that much of what she's saying is true now. That Anne didn't kill her sister, that Eleanor, upon dying, saw a chance to have one last blow at the eldest. Eleanor took that one last chance, and despite the Harper's belief that the death are beyond being petty, Meg doubts it, and thus we doubt it. And we see this feud that continues on past death for no reason. And it's just always stood out to me, that ending, that almost poetic statement, it was not true then, but I will make it true now. Well, at least that much of what she said is true. And it's just this questioning about truth and belief and what we think of people and others. The reason this book is going to be attached to the Enchanted Forest Chronicles is because there are a couple of stories in this, 2 stories in this, that are clearly set in that universe. The first of those stories is The Princess, the Cat, and the Unicorn, which is definitively set in the Enchanted Forest universe because the princess winds up in the Enchanted Forest. And the last one, Utensile Strength, which stars King Mendenbar, Queen Cimmerine, their son Daystar, and the Frying Pan of Doom. It's a wonderful takeoff on the usual fairy tale of the princess running away and hiding out in in a kitchen somewhere, only to be discovered by the prince who falls in love with her In point of fact, the fact that her uncle shows up and is shrieking about how he will marry her suggests that this is in fact a takeoff of the fairy tale of Donkey Skin, which, if you've been following me, which I know no one has, but that's okay, you'll remember that I talked about Robin McKinley's Deerskin, which was also a takeoff of Donkey Skin, a story of a king whose wife is so beautiful that she's just the worst kind of person who makes him promise to never marry anyone less beautiful than she is. And he discovers when his daughter grows up that his daughter is the only woman as beautiful as his wife was, so he decides he's going to marry his daughter, and it's all kinds of weird and squicky and horrible. A couple of these, Roses by Moonlight and The Lorelei, are both set in more or less contemporary times. Roses by Moonlight is kind of a fairy tale come to life. It's very, very much, it reads in the same way that you or I would feel if suddenly faced with a fairy tale. That sense of perplexity, that sense of what's going on, of why, and yet a basic understanding of the logic of the fairy tale that means that you follow the rules. In Roses by Moonlight, in point of fact, you have the young woman who's outside, who doesn't get along with her sister, and her mother comes out and tells her, it's a 7th year, you should be expecting a friend of mine to come. And that friend comes, and we never know who that friend is. We never know if she's a fairy, if she's a god, if she's a what, we don't know. What we know is that she has a garden of roses that she can make appear, and each rose is a dream, a future, a potential thing that could happen in your life. And if you pick a rose from her garden, it makes that ending inevitable. And at the end of the story, Adrian makes a choice that is potentially wise, potentially not, but you'll never know, of saying she's not going to pick a rose, she's going to just let her life happen the way it happens. That she listens to her mother who warned her that there are other dreams, that yes, this was the dream that she had picked. What she had wanted was to have a man who would never leave her, a man who would live with a comfortable income, a house and children and a garden and all of those sorts of things, and that she had looked no further than that because that was what she wanted in that moment. And that years later, she knows she chose this, and it is her choice that she made, and she has to live with it. But she recommends that her daughter think more carefully, and Sam does, and decides that she will let her life happen the way it happens. She won't pick something that will ensure that her life goes a particular way. Some of these stories are funny, and some of them are sad, and as I've said, several of them are very, very poignant. And so this is one of my favorites. It's just such a lovely book, and for the record, I haven't even talked about the saddest story in this. The saddest story in this being Stronger Than Time, which that's a 3 hanky story, word of warning. And so this will go in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles listing, but it's more than that, and it's other than that, and this is a book that I can't recommend highly enough, really. And that's everything. So thanks for listening, anyone who has, and I will see you next week.